It's Wednesday on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Ray Fittipaldo. Russell Wilson is officially going to be joining the New York Giants. What does that mean for the Steelers, Aaron Rodgers, and the quarterback saga that is 2025? We talk about that. We talk about the comp pick scenario that may be helping out the Steelers in next year's NFL draft with all the players that they've let go into free agency, and the Steelers taking a close look at certain players at Ohio State's Pro Day. All that here and more on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo. We are your Steelers writers, and as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Not only will they represent you when you're injured in a car accident and you're hurt or you're hurt on the job, they'll also represent you when you need workers' compensation help. Be sure to call Edgar Snyder Associates at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, let's talk about the big news that happened yesterday, and that was Russell Wilson signing with the New York Giants. Signed, we saw the thing, the incentives up to $21 million. It's really just $10.5 million. And if he plays through his incentives, maybe he hits that number. And we'll talk about the comp pick scenario of that. But what does this move say about the Steelers' plans with Aaron Rodgers? Russell Wilson was perceivably an option for them. Obviously, it wasn't looking great considering they didn't just bring him back when they didn't get Justin Fields. But does this lock the Steelers into Aaron Rodgers, or do you think there's still something else that could be at play here?
No, I think there's only one dance partner left for Aaron Rodgers. It's the Steelers, and unless he wants to retire, and there really hasn't been a lot of talk about that. I know people have speculated that's the other move that he could make, but it seems like everything is in line for the Steelers to get Aaron Rodgers. I just don't think we know what the exact timeline is. So, I feel pretty confident that Rodgers will be the quarterback for the Steelers in 2025, and I think that was pretty much sealed when Russell Wilson and the New York Giants last night saw that writing on the wall.
Yeah, I think that's what's going to be interesting here. Is what does this do for the situation in negotiations? Because I have to wonder with Aaron Rodgers, it was the big thing that he wanted from the Steelers was more money. And, it could, before, you could play that game with other suitors, whether it was the Vikings or the Giants, but, there've been the report that the Vikings are out. And now obviously the Giants are out because not only do they have Russell Wilson, they have Jameis Winston. So they're not going to, sign Aaron Rodgers at all now. They're not going to do that. So now his last chance is to be a starter in today's 2025 season is the Pittsburgh Steelers. And again, it's a team that made the playoffs 4 out of the last 5 years. You're going to have DK Metcalf. You're probably going to have George Pickens. You're going to have Pat Freiermuth. They're going to have, a young offensive line that they're hoping that takes a step up this year. And you're going to have a defense that's at least top 10. So you have all those factors for you. So I just wonder what's the big holdup for Aaron Rodgers at this point, other than just he wants to keep people in suspense.
Yeah, I mean, it's Aaron Rodgers, and I don't think anyone can even understand what his process is. I think he's very deliberate, and I think he came in here for a visit. He investigated. He found out some things that he wanted to know, and then he went back to wherever, California. He's going to sit on this, and he's going to do it on his own time frame. So, again, Steelers fans, I wouldn't be worried. I think it's going to be Aaron Rodgers. But listen, if it's not, I think there's a big portion of the Steelers fan base that'd be feeling even better if it's Mason Rudolph. So I think either way, whether it's Mason or Aaron, I think the Steelers are in decent shape for next year. And I know we're going to talk about this at length leading up to the draft and through the season. Whatever happens with Aaron Rodgers or Mason Rudolph, it's just that 1-year bridge to find that next future franchise quarterback. Nothing changes, Chris. If Aaron Rodgers signs, they can still draft a quarterback in the middle rounds of this draft.
Mm-hmm.
They could still take a quarterback, try to make a big move, and try to go get Arch Manning or Drew Aller or Sellers or any number, Nussmeier, any of those quarterbacks in next year's draft too. That's supposed to be, much better than this year's crop. So I know people are focused on Rodgers, but in the grand scheme of things, I know we're talking about beyond the 2025 season now, but I think the end game here is who's going to be playing Steelers, a quarterback for the Steelers in 2026, 2027, 2028. That's the long-term plan that everyone really is worried about.
I think that's what people need to bring out into perspective, because I see people being like, "Oh man, this is all the time we want. This is what they want to do. They just want to go with Aaron Rodgers." They just, listen, they're going with him because they're going with a 1-year rental, and they figure like, "Hey, this guy could be." But he's not the future. He's not the long-term plan. This is simply to get them through this season with competitive quarterback play that can, again, play to a system that's going to be preferencing its defense and its run game, as they hope as they move forward here. And again, they've now added more weapons to the wide receiver room, so that's also going to be a different situation there. But I do wonder though, because whereas I am on the more patient side of like, listen, I thought it was kind of an acknowledgement when they signed Russell Wilson and traded for Justin Fields that 2026 was always the quarterback plan, because everyone knew back this time last year that the 2025 quarterback class was not going to be that good.
Right.
People thought Carson Beck was going to be part of it. So there was that very national acknowledgement that was going to be the case. And then, we get to this season and people were like, "Oh man, they're not trying to make moves in this draft." Yeah, because no one wants to make moves in this draft class, because if you're not getting Cam Ward, you're taking a really, really big leap of faith on Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart or whoever you want to look at this year. So this has always been the plan for, like, they needed one more year of getting through the quarterback classes, and then next year hope that class continues to look like it's been looking like, and that becomes the year they make a move. But Ray, I do think where the big question is, that still exists for me at least, is if this team supposedly had issues with Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson, and that led to conflicts, and that was part of what happened at the end of the season. Russell Wilson couldn't call his audibles and whatever, and this, that, and the third. What do they think is going to happen with Aaron Rodgers when he comes to town? And this is a guy who openly embarrassed, and his last head coach, Robert Saleh, is a guy who didn't show up last year to OTAs and minicamp. And there's now big questions. And sure, he did that 2 years ago when he first got to the Jets, but he barely played, didn't even play a game with them in that season. And he needed to be able to get up with his team. And that was a big question going into this year. What's to show the Steelers that Aaron Rodgers is going to be this positive force that's different than the image he's portrayed in the last few places he's been?
I think that's what that meeting last week at the UPMC Rooney Complex was all about. Aaron Rodgers, here's Arthur Smith. Sit down with him for an hour or two. Let's see if this can work. Arthur Smith, here's Aaron Rodgers. Are you going to be able to tweak your offense and allow Aaron Rodgers to be Aaron Rodgers within the scope of your offense? I mean, those are all things that I think Aaron and the Steelers had to figure out at that meeting. I think the Steelers would be fine with it. I think when you have, I don't want to knock Russell Wilson, but Russell Wilson won a Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers won a Super Bowl, and he's a 4-time NFL MVP. So there's a little bit of a difference there, and how that guy sees the game, how he would work with receivers, throwing to different parts of the field wouldn't just be, hey, Russell, chuck it deep, which is kind of what we, were left with last year, and that obviously wasn't good enough at the end of the season. So, like I said, I think that's what that meeting was all about. And, the Steelers have to feel confident that it could work on some level. Is it going to be perfect with Aaron Rodgers? No. There's plenty of evidence with the Packers and the Jets that it's not going to be perfect. But in a one-year scenario, I think the Steelers feel comfortable that they could, work around those things, and they can make it beneficial for both Rodgers and for the team.
As we've stated several times now, the Steelers are putting themselves in a position to go get that quarterback next year. I want to talk about things they've done this year that could set them up for big opportunities to move up in the draft, wherever they end up in the draft class as far as their original picks. We'll talk about that and how comp picks play into that scenario, especially with the addition of Russell Wilson into that pool next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Did you know that they also do workers' compensation? When you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatment's over? Who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. It's the insurance company's doctors. How does that make you feel? If the answer is not great, you got to call Edgar Snyder and Associates today. They call them at 1-800-94-EDGAR. They'll fight for the workers' comp rights that you deserve. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're also brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. Are you ready to train like a champion? UFC Gym has everything for total body health under one roof. They have group classes from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Zumba, personal training, cardio, weights, cryotherapy, infrared saunas, and more. All for an unbeatable price. Not sure where to begin? All members get a starter session with an expert coach to help map out your fitness plan. Your first visit is on us. Drop in with free parking at Market Square or the waterfront and follow UFC Gym Pittsburgh on social media. Train different, feel unstoppable at UFC Gym. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the comp pick scenario because Russell Wilson, he was reported to sign a $21.5 million initially. It's really just 10.5 with in guarantees. The 21 will kick in if he reaches certain incentives. Some people believe that's just simply if he plays out the whole season as the starter, or if he reaches so many games as a starter. So that's all well and dandy. That works there for the Steelers out. But now this adds to a pool of players that the Steelers can have who they let go into free agency that can count them towards their future comp picks as far as what they get next year. Now, just a reminder, how this works is the Steelers, when a team lets a player go into free agency, that player where they get signed and how much they get signed for factors into how they've done it. Now, it does not count if they cut the players. If they cut the players, they do not count into the comp pick formula. But then at the end of at the end of this calculation period, when all this is tallied up and it's seen how long these players have played, before next season's draft, teams will be informed you receive this amount of comp picks in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round, whatever it'll be. Now, the Steelers didn't get any comp picks this past year because they didn't have players that went into that formula. This year, they have several players. Dan Moore factors into that. Justin Fields factors into that. I think Dante Jackson factors in it. They have several guys, and now Russell Wilson with his contract factors into that. Ray, is there the potential for them to have the ammunition with this that they could use these picks as their leverage to move up and go get the quarterback they really want next year?
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility, Chris, and I think that speculation is going to run rampant here. No matter what, they are going to have 10 draft picks in the 2026 draft, unless they make a trade, sometime between now and the 2026 draft. They have 10. They have their own picks, and they have at least 4 comp picks based on the guys you just mentioned. Dan Moore is currently a 3rd-round comp pick. That's not going to change. Justin Fields, a 4th. Right now, Russell Wilson is a 5th, but according to overthecap.com, if those incentives are met, that can be bumped up to a 3rd. Fields could even be bumped up to a 3rd. And then James Daniels, who signed for $24 million over 3 years, is a 6th-round pick. So right now, a 3rd, a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th. So that's plenty of ammunition that you might need to go up and get that quarterback. And, it's not going to be like this year where you mentioned before, it's just Cam Ward is the prime quarterback. Next year, you have Arch Manning, you have Drew Aller, you have the kid from South Carolina,
Lenore Sellers.
Yeah, Grant Nussmeier from LSU,
Mm-hmm.
and the kid from Tennessee.
Nico Iamaleava. I know you're talking about, yeah.
I'm going to let you pronounce his name because
I'm not even sure I did it right, Ray.
But he would probably be the 5th guy. So there are 5 potential 1st-round picks, and we don't know how it's going to go. Maybe one of those guys falls off the face of the earth, but the point is it's expected to be a much better quarterback class next year than it is this year. So go back and look at history. What did it take for the Chiefs to move up? What they had to move up to get Patrick Mahomes, right? I mean, that's going to be part of this whole calculus for the Steelers. There's been other big trades, moves to go up and get quarterbacks. It's not going to be cheap, Chris. If the Steelers finish, 10-7 again, they're going to have to use that draft capital to go up and get a quarterback. And it might be they're trading their own 1st and 2nd and a future 1st and a 2nd. And those comp picks are merely going to be their draft picks for next year where they fill in the rest of the roster. So people have to understand that. It's going to be expensive to go up and get your quarterback. But when you don't have a franchise guy, Chris, you have to be willing to go out and spend that draft capital.
Absolutely. And just a reminder, the Steelers, or excuse me, the Chiefs, when they traded up, they traded up to the 10th overall pick from the 27th overall pick, I believe. And in doing so, they gave up their first. So they traded them the 27th overall pick. They traded them an extra 2013 or extra third round pick for 2017, and then they traded their first round pick for 2018. So essentially, they swapped first round picks, and they gave them an extra first round for the next year and a third rounder for that season. Like that's the kind of stuff that you're thinking that might happen here. And look, it might be that, but here's what also can happen here is that the Steelers could feel comfortable enough that they're like, look, we'll give you we'll swap firsts, and then we'll give you next year's first, and then maybe a slew of comp picks, and then that way, they may not have a first round pick in 2027, but if they have their quarterback of their dreams, they'll still have a full gamut of picks behind the quarterback that they select next year, which I think is really what the key is for the Steelers, is making sure that they're not leveraging the farm where they're giving up several key picks to keep building their roster. Because, as much as the Steelers are a competitive team right now, they need to be still finding those young pieces that are going to fit for them in the future. Like D tackle is a priority right now because Cam Hayward's a guy, next year, cornerback might be more of a priority if they don't figure things out with Corey Trice, or if they don't get another guy, or if Joey Porter Jr. doesn't work out. There could be questions at safety if they don't want to keep Minkah Fitzpatrick that much longer. If they need to re-up at wide receiver because they don't keep George Pickens, all those types of things are going to be factoring in, and they're going to need those picks. So if they can find a way to amass these comp picks, maybe not to use them directly, but to use them as leverage to still have their normal picks while also trading up in the first round, I think that's the key here that the Steelers have been focusing on.
Yeah, it could be a very smart strategy. I think we should also point out that when the Steelers signed Darius Slay, that does not work into the comp pick formula because he was released by the Eagles. Obviously, when you acquire a DK Metcalf by trade, he's not a free agent. That does not count. So they were still able to make some, one big move and then one semi-big move, but they did it without using the free agency, which works into that formula. So I think this is a definite strategy that the Steelers are employing. And I think it all points towards doing something in the 2026 draft, and that likely is trying to find a quarterback.
Absolutely. I think that's a big factor in this is this has, I think, been the play for the Steelers since they traded Kenny Pickett. When they got Russell Wilson and they got Justin Fields, sure, there was the hope that one of these guys that Russell Wilson could work out for 3 seasons and buy you some time, or that Justin Fields would turn from, the first round pick that didn't work out for the Bears into a guy that you remodeled and made your guy for the Steelers. But I still think that in all of that, the Steelers knew what it was. They knew that there was the likelihood of either of those happening is a lot less, of a chance of them trying to go get your guy in 2026 and say, hey, this is the supposed draft year. This is what we're excited about. Let's load up and go get that guy so that can be this generation's Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, that's what for all the great moves that Kevin Colbert made, being able to draft Ben Roethlisberger in 2004, that built the big house that he set himself up for 2 decades for the Steelers. Omar Khan wants that guy, and it makes me wonder, Ray, if maybe they're in a situation where the Steelers front office and in their war room, as they're looking at not just this year's draft class, but the future draft classes, if they're like, hey, we have this one guy or these 2 guys or however many guys, these are the quarterbacks that we really, really want. If we get one of these guys, this can be the guy that we build the franchise around.
Yeah, and it's not going to, like, people remember 2004, Bill Cowher was a Phillip Rivers guy.
Yeah.
Bill Cowher wanted Phillip Rivers, and it just so happened they couldn't make the move to go up and get him. And I don't want to say they settled for Ben, but they ended up getting Ben, when they stood pat there. So you do have to, that's an important distinction. You do have to feel comfortable with multiple guys in that draft. Like I said, there's 5, maybe more guys. Maybe one of those guys isn't your cup of tea. Maybe you don't believe in that guy. But if you can get comfortable with 3 of them, then you can sort of look at the draft board, see which other teams need quarterbacks, and then you make your move to get into the top 10 or wherever you have to be to go up and get the guy that you want.
Absolutely. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about the newest pro day the Steelers are paying a lot of attention to, and that's Ohio State. Always a big one for them on the recruiting trail when they're looking at players across the country. We'll talk about who they're focusing on the most there right now and what that says about the Steelers draft plans for this season. That and more here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, remind you the show is brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. There you have mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, or visit their website at moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
We gave the all-electric Prologue EX class-leading passenger space. And we made its tech intuitive with Google built-in. Perhaps that's why we were named Best Overall EV and Hybrid Brand by Kelley Blue Book. It's nice when a dream comes together. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, continuing the show here. Ray, let's talk about where the Steelers are now with this draft class, and that's they could get different pieces here and there. We've talked a lot about defensive linemen, but they're at Ohio State's pro day, always a big one. They pay a lot of attention to the Ohio State prospects, and naturally they produce a lot of top tier talent over the years. That's how they got Cam Hayward, plenty of guys like that. This year, Jerry Dulac, our guy, reports that the Steelers met privately with three players in particular in the night leading up to Ohio State's pro day, and that was quarterback Will Howard and both the running backs TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. And so looking at that, what does that tell you about what the Steelers might be focusing on as far as where are those three guys that you're looking at heavily here in the draft process?
Yeah, I think both for Will Howard and the running backs, you're looking at day 2 or day 3 types of picks. I would think Howard probably more in the round 4 range. Maybe if you really like him and you think another team's going to swoop in, maybe you would convince yourself that you can use that number 83 pick on him in the 3rd round. And I think both Henderson and Judkins, listen, Henderson's probably going to go in round 2. I don't know that he's going to fall to round 3. So maybe if you get a 2nd round pick back somehow, you would be in play for Henderson. Judkins, I don't know. I've seen different things on him. I think he's not a 1st round guy, but he's a guy who could be around in the 3rd round at number 83. And he would fit, honestly, Chris, right now, depending on how the Steelers want to structure their backfield, right now you have 2 smaller backs in Kenneth Gainwell and Jaylen Warren.
Yeah.
Quinshon Judkins would give you that bigger back for short yardage and goal line situations, while Henderson would probably mimic more, the Gainwell and Warren comps. So, if you're looking to get a different type of a back, I think Judkins is probably the guy to keep an eye on. But listen, they can go any way. There's tons of running backs in this class. You can go big, you can go small, you can go intermediate in between. I'm fairly confident whether it's in round 3 or 4, I think they're going to get a starter-capable guy who at the very least is going to be able to share the workload with Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell in 2025.
I want to go back to your comparison of the running backs there. When you say Quinshon Judkins is big, he is 6 foot, 221, and he runs a 4.48 in the 40-yard dash. That is a sturdy fella who can get up and go. When you look at that. Now, compare that to TreVeyon Henderson, runs a 4.43, so slightly faster there, but 5'10", 202. And I think that, like you said, 5'10" is not tiny, but when you add on those 2 extra inches and those 20 extra pounds, and you're only giving up just a little bit of speed there, 1/20th of a second there. Granted, that speed is noticeable and that can play out. I think those are the types of things that you look at as far as what type of running back do the Steelers want. We talked about, how much the Steelers want to run that outside zone where quickness and speed and space is going to play a factor. It makes me wonder, would they have a preference to mix things up, or would they want to get a guy that fits more of that quicker, faster pace of play?
Yeah, it's going to be all about what you need. I mean, it's interesting. I think Henderson is rated a little bit higher because he has more pass catching abilities. And he's been called the best pass protecting running back in this draft class. And that's obviously a big need for a lot of NFL teams. Now, for the Steelers, it's not right now, because in 2025, you have both Warren and Gainwell who can handle both of those duties, both protection and catching the ball out of the backfield really, really well. The only issue right now, Chris, is neither of those guys are signed beyond 2025. So if you're looking, if you draft a guy like Henderson, okay, you're looking at him to be that long-term 3-down option, and you're probably going to not bring back Kenneth Gainwell or Jalen Warren. I think if it would be the other way around, if it would be a guy, if it would be Judkins or a guy like him, then maybe you think about, okay, we're going to keep Jalen Warren around beyond 2025, and Judkins is going to be our first and second down back. And, we'll see if we can get a little more juice and a little bit more big play injected into our offense.
Absolutely. I think that's going to be interesting to see how they try to use that. And again, like you said, this is a deep running back class. So it doesn't have to be Judkins or Henderson. It can be, Jadon Blue out of Texas. It could be, DJ Giddens out of Kansas State. It could be Jacob, what's his face? I forget the guy from Iowa right now. I'm blanking on his name. But there's Devin Neal out of Kansas. Yes, Caleb Johnson.
Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State is rumored to be coming in for a visit. So,
and so you have, and these are all different styles of backs here. Like, for example, Caleb Johnson, a bigger, quicker type of back that plays into this. But you look at like Jadon Blue out of Texas, he ran a 4.38 in his 40-yard dash. So whatever the Steelers want to do, there's plenty of space in this draft class to go find their type of running back that they want to be a long-term piece of their system with Arthur Smith moving forward. But the other player here to talk about, and we'll get to Emeka Egbuka in a second, but Will Howard. You and I have talked about Will Howard. We've talked about this quarterback draft class. I have Will Howard as my top of like the day 3 prospects that if they're there and all the other guys are gone, I think Will Howard would be the Steelers' best option there. What do you think of Will Howard and the potential of the Steelers getting him as their quarterback that's the rookie on this upcoming roster?
Yeah, I think, in terms of mid-round quarterbacks, I think the floor for him is probably a decent backup. And then, the ceiling, if everything is right around him, then maybe he could develop into a future starter. And, that's what the Steelers are looking for, obviously. When you don't have that franchise guy, sometimes it makes sense to take a guy in the middle rounds and see if you like him, see if you could develop him. I don't know that the Philadelphia Eagles knew they had their guy in Jalen Hurts when they took him with the number 54 overall pick, 5-6 years ago. But he's turned out to be that guy. And why is that? It's not because he was this elite talent coming out of Alabama or Oklahoma. It's that they have the perfect offense set up around him, an elite offensive line, 2 really good, highly paid receivers, the best running back in the NFL. So, you can make it work. And I'm not taking anything away from Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, I think, is the top 5 quarterback in the NFL now. But I think you have to acknowledge he is that because of the players around him too. So It depends how your team is structured, where you are in your team building process. I think we could all acknowledge the Steelers aren't there yet. But if they can get that guy in place, if they could work with him, they could develop him, then maybe, down the road in the future, he could turn out to be that guy. But I think at the very least, Chris, Will Howard's going to play 7-10 years in the NFL. It might be as a backup, but that's okay too.
I want to take this opportunity, whereas Jerry didn't report that they were talking to Emeka Egbuka, should people take that as a sign that they're not as interested in him, or do you think that they've seen what they've needed out of Emeka Egbuka to factor into where they put him in their big board already?
Yeah, I don't want to say it's unusual because sometimes, these guys have different teams that they meet with, and there might have been a commitment for him to have dinner with another team before him. So let's see if Egbuka comes in for a top 30 visit. If he doesn't come in for a top 30 visit, then that maybe means they don't think he's in play at 21, or they wouldn't have a chance at him in the second round. So you have to take all those things into consideration. I still think he's going to be a good number 2 receiver in the NFL. Would make sense with DK Metcalf long-term, but we all know, Chris, we've talked about it at length. They probably have bigger needs than receiver right now at number 21.
Absolutely. We'll keep you up to date with what those needs, how those needs develop, and where the draft develops here on the North Shore Drive podcast here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. From Chris Carter and Ray Fittipaldo, thanks for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes up from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're back Friday breaking things down and letting you know how the things went for the week. Who knows? Maybe there's finally an Aaron Rodgers update. Find out here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.